For a moment, nothing changes. The darkness you see with your eyelids shut looks strangely similar to the darkness behind them. Yet something subtle happens. The world disappears, but you do not. The sounds around you fade into the background, and your attention shifts inward. Instinctively, you feel located somewhere specific. Not in your hands, not in your chest, not in your feet. You feel like you are sitting just behind your eyes. It feels obvious, almost too obvious to question. You are a viewer, and your eyes are windows. The world is out there, and you are in here, peering outward from the control room inside your skull. Most people never doubt this. It feels as certain as gravity. But that certainty hides a strange assumption, that there is a place where you are. Imagine for a second that your eyes are not windows at all. They are sensors, more like microphones than glass. Light particles strike specialized cells at the back of your eyes. These cells don't show you an image. They convert light into electrical signals. Those signals travel along the optic nerve and end in the rear of your brain, far from where you feel yourself to be. You never see the world directly. Your brain does. There is no image entering your mind. There is only coded electricity. Your brain reconstructs the outside world from patterns of signals, like a computer interpreting data. Color, shape, depth, motion, none of these exist inside your head as physical objects. They exist as interpretations. And yet, you still feel like you are sitting behind your eyes watching it all. Why? Because your brain needs a reference point. To navigate a world, a system must know where here is. So your brain builds a model of reality, a map, and then places a marker on that map labeled "You are here." Since your primary sensors face forward, it puts the marker at the front of the head. The feeling of being behind your eyes is not a discovery. It is a decision your brain makes. Your brain is not showing you reality directly. It is showing you a simulation good enough to keep you alive. In that simulation, there must be a viewpoint, a perspective, an observer. So the brain invents one. Not a person, not a soul, not a tiny watcher inside your skull. Just a point of view embedded in a model, a coordinate in a mental map. The strange thing is that you cannot perceive the model itself. You only perceive the world the model creates. You experience the simulation as reality and the viewpoint as yourself. You feel like you are located somewhere because the model requires a location. But consider this. If you were truly a little observer inside your head, that observer would need its own eyes to see the brain's images. And inside those eyes, there would have to be another observer, and another inside that one forever. An infinite regress of tiny watchers. That can't be how it works. Instead, there is no watcher separate from the experience. The experience itself is what you are. Your brain does not display a world to you. Your brain produces a world and includes within it a character, a perspective, and that perspective feels like me. The location you feel is part of the story the brain tells itself. And because the story is consistent, you never notice it is a story. You don't feel like a process. You feel like a presence. Yet nothing inside your skull is sitting in darkness observing images. There is only activity. Billions of neurons exchanging signals, forming patterns that represent a world and a viewpoint within it. The viewpoint feels real because it is stable. It feels located because the map requires coordinates. You are not behind your eyes. You are the activity that creates the idea that you are behind them. And once you begin to suspect that, a quiet realization appears. Your sense of where you are may not be a fact about reality at all. It may be a feature of the brain's model. In 1954, a neuroscientist named John Lilly built a strange device. It looked less like laboratory equipment and more like a sealed capsule, a smooth enclosed chamber filled with warm salt water, heated to match the temperature of human skin. When someone lay inside, they floated effortlessly. The water supported their body completely. The air was still. The light was absent. Sound was nearly eliminated. The purpose was simple: remove every possible sensory input. No sight, no pressure from gravity, no temperature differences, no clear sound, no changing environment. For the first time in human history, researchers could ask a direct question. What does the mind do when it receives almost no information from the outside world? When volunteers first entered the tank, they expected relaxation. Many believed they would fall asleep. Instead, something stranger happened. At first, nothing seemed unusual. They heard their breathing. They noticed their heartbeat. They felt their thoughts wandering. But after several minutes, the brain began to react to the absence of stimulation. Your brain is not passive. It is a prediction machine. Normally, sensory signals constantly update the brain's model of reality. Vision tells it where you are. The inner ear tells it which direction is up. Touch confirms the position of your limbs. The brain compares expectations to incoming data and corrects errors. That constant loop keeps your sense of self stable. Inside the tank, the loop breaks. The brain continues predicting, but there is no incoming data to correct it. And when predictions are not corrected, the brain does not go quiet. It becomes creative. Participants began reporting faint lights in the darkness, not imagined in the usual sense. They were seen. Shapes formed. Colors pulsed. Geometric patterns floated across the visual field. After longer periods, some heard voices or music. Others felt movement, even though they were perfectly still. Then a more disturbing effect appeared. People started losing track of their bodies. Some could not tell where their hands were. Some felt their legs had disappeared. Others reported expanding beyond their physical form, as if their boundaries dissolved into the surrounding space. Without touch and gravity confirming a body, the brain's body model weakened. The brain had always assumed a body existed because sensory signals supported that assumption. When the signals vanished, the assumption destabilized. A few participants described an even stranger experience. They no longer felt located anywhere, not floating in the tank, not inside their head, not in their chest, just awareness without a position. The brain, deprived of sensory anchors, could not determine a spatial reference point. The "you are here" marker in the mental map began to drift, and sometimes disappeared entirely. This revealed something critical. Your sense of self-location does not come from a discovered fact about your existence. It comes from a calculation. The brain estimates where you are by combining sensory information. When that information stops, the estimate fails. The self did not leave the body. The brain simply lost the data it uses to place the self. After leaving the tank, participants returned to normal almost immediately. Vision, balance, and touch flooded the system again, and the brain rebuilt the body model. The sense of being behind the eyes snapped back into place as if nothing had happened. But something important had been demonstrated. Your feeling of being located in your body is not permanent. It is maintained. And anything that must be maintained can, under certain conditions, disappear. The tank did not remove consciousness. People remained aware the entire time. Thoughts continued. Experiences continued. What changed was not awareness itself. It was the brain's ability to anchor awareness to a physical position. The experiment suggested a surprising possibility. The mind may not inherently occupy a place. Instead, the brain continuously computes a location for the self, just as it computes color, motion, and depth. When the inputs vanish, the computation fails, and awareness remains, but without coordinates. The self did not move. The map lost its marker. Imagine sitting at a table, your real hand hidden from view. In front of you rests a rubber hand, eerily lifelike, fingers poised as if ready to grasp something. A researcher picks up 2 paintbrushes. One strokes your hidden hand, the other strokes the rubber hand. The rhythm is perfect, the timing is precise. At first, it feels strange. You know your hand is hidden. You know the rubber hand is fake. But after a few minutes, something shifts. a subtle confusion grows. Your mind begins to make a new connection. The strokes you feel and the strokes you see match so closely that your brain starts to accept the impossible. The rubber hand is yours. When someone taps the rubber hand with a needle, your body reacts. Your muscles flinch. Your heartbeat quickens. You experience fear for an object that isn't even part of your body. Your brain has rewritten the rules. The boundary between self and other has blurred. This is no parlor trick. It's a window into how your brain constructs the sense of self. Your perception of ownership, of what belongs to you, is not hardwired. It is inferred from correlations in sensory input. Seeing a hand being touched while feeling touch in synchrony is enough for your brain to declare, "This is mine." Vision, touch, and timing converge to convince you of something that is demonstrably false. The implications are unsettling. Your sense of bodily self is not a fact of the universe. It's a flexible prediction made by a predictive organ. If the brain can be fooled by a rubber hand, then the feeling of being inside your body is just a construction. It is not the self. It is a model. And like any model, it can be altered, distorted, or erased. In the 2000s, scientists took this further. Using virtual reality, they gave people the illusion of standing outside their own bodies. Participants wore headsets showing a live feed from cameras placed behind them, creating a third-person perspective. Researchers then touched the participants' real bodies while simultaneously touching the space in the video. The visual input and tactile feedback matched, but spatially, they were separated by several feet. Within moments, participants reported floating behind themselves. Looking down, they saw their own body from a distance. Their brain's self-location estimate had shifted. Functional imaging confirmed the experience. Activity in the temporal parietal junction, a brain region associated with self-location, aligned with the position of the camera, not the actual body. The mind had moved, at least in the brain's model of where I exist. These illusions show something profound. The sense of being inside a body, of occupying a point in space, is not a fixed property of consciousness. It is a dynamic construction, constantly updated and maintained by the brain. The self, anchored in your body under normal circumstances, can be displaced with carefully orchestrated sensory input. It's disorienting to realize that the mind you feel behind your eyes is not intrinsic. There is no you physically standing behind your skull, peering at the world. The homunculus, the little person inside your head, is an illusion. Your brain places the self at the sensory focal point because it is useful for interacting with the environment. Vision is forward-facing, so you feel forward-facing. Touch comes from your body, so you feel embodied. But these are tricks of computation, not the location of the mind. What the rubber hand and virtual reality experiments reveal is chilling and liberating at once. Your sense of ownership, your sense of being located in space, is fragile. It can be manipulated. Your mind, the conscious experience you take for granted, is a model generated by a machine, and like all models, it can be bent, stretched, or temporarily broken. You are not fixed. You are predicted. You are constructed. And when your construction is challenged, you catch a glimpse of a truth that is easy to ignore but impossible to unsee. The self is more flexible than your intuition allows. It is not where you think it is. In 2007, neuroscientists devised an experiment that would make the mind itself seem untethered from the body. Participants lay inside an fMRI scanner, their brains humming quietly as machines measured neural activity with millimeter precision. They wore virtual reality goggles showing a live feed from cameras positioned behind them, a few feet away. In that feed, they could see themselves lying still, perfectly framed from a third-person perspective. The experimenters then introduced a subtle trick. They used two sticks. One tapped the participant's actual chest, hidden from view, while the other tapped the empty air in the camera's perspective. Visually, the poke happened at the displaced location. Tactilely, it happened on the body. Within seconds, the brain began to reconcile the mismatch. The participants reported an astonishing experience. They felt themselves floating 6 feet behind their physical bodies, looking down at themselves from an external viewpoint. Functional imaging revealed why this illusion felt so real. The temporal parietal junction, a brain region critically involved in self-location and perspective taking, was active in alignment with the visual perspective of the camera rather than the physical location of the body. The brain's model of self-location had shifted. It was not that the participants had left their bodies. It was that the predictive machinery of their minds had redefined where I exists in space. This experiment illustrates a remarkable truth. Self-location is not intrinsic. It is inferred. Your sense of being inside your body, the anchor you trust as unshakable, is a dynamic calculation based on correlated sensory inputs. Sight, touch, balance, proprioception. The brain weaves them together to produce a coherent sense of where you are. Alter the data, and the self moves. Consider the implications. Out-of-body experiences, often treated as mystical or paranormal, are simply the brain recalibrating its model of self-location under unusual sensory conditions. Floating above yourself, feeling detached from your body, is not evidence of a soul leaving the skull. It is the outcome of neural computation, a misalignment of inputs that exposes the machinery behind your everyday experience. Even under normal circumstances, the brain is performing a similar feat continuously. When you turn your head, reach for a cup, or navigate through a crowded room, your brain integrates streams of sensory information, predicts consequences of movements, and constantly updates the perceived location of the self. The sense of being here is a model, maintained by neurons firing in synchrony across multiple regions. This sheds light on the very nature of consciousness. If self-location is constructed, then the feeling of being a subject occupying a point in space is not a property of consciousness itself. It is part of the content of consciousness, a piece of the ongoing story your brain tells about the world and your place in it. Consciousness does not require a location. The brain constructs one, and we take it for granted. Furthermore, these experiments highlight the distributed nature of the mind. Self-location arises from patterns of activity across different regions of the brain. There is no central observer in a single spot monitoring all inputs. The unity of experience, seeing, feeling, knowing that you are here, emerges from coordination across multiple neural networks, not from a central point. For decades, this challenged the most basic intuitions about selfhood. If the mind can feel as if it exists outside the body, what does that say about our everyday assumption that consciousness is in our skulls? It suggests that the mind is more fluid than we imagine. Selfhood, perspective, the location of experience, all are products of computation, not properties of things. In short, the experiment shows that the brain is a predictive engine creating the illusion of a fixed point of self. When the inputs shift, the illusion shifts too. Floating behind one's own body is not supernatural. It is science revealing the architecture of perception and the mechanics of the mind's most fundamental assumptions. The mind is not bound. It is constructed. And once you see it can move beyond the physical body, the notion of a fixed, localized self begins to dissolve. Self-location, once thought obvious and certain, becomes something fragile, malleable, and astonishingly contingent, a revelation that sets the stage for understanding consciousness itself. When Feynman finally climbed out of the isolation tank, he felt both shaken and enlightened. The walls of the tank had been dark, soundless, and temperature neutral, yet his mind had experienced a vast, uncharted terrain. The sensation of a fixed body, of being located behind his eyes or inside his skull, had dissolved entirely. For the first time, he confronted a stark possibility. Consciousness does not occupy space. It does not sit in the head, nor in the body. It is not a container with boundaries. It is a process, a dynamic activity, an emergent pattern arising from the brain's operations. Feynman realized that the sense of being somewhere, a location, an anchor point in the world, is a construct, not a given. The brain models reality using sensory data and, in doing so, assigns a reference point for the self. That reference point feels natural and immediate, but it is arbitrarily determined. Vision, for example, dominates the experience of perspective. Because eyes face forward and collect rich spatial information, the mind situates the observer at the point of the primary senses, creating the illusion of behind the eyes as a vantage point. Yet there is no you physically lodged there. He understood now why people could experience out-of-body phenomena, hallucinations, and the shifting sense of self. These were not signs of the supernatural or evidence of a soul drifting beyond its vessel. They were demonstrations of how the brain constructs location and identity, disrupt the sensory input by deprivation, virtual reality, trauma, or pharmacological means, and the self-model rearranges. The mind remains conscious and aware, yet its anchor in space dissolves. This revelation unsettled him at first. It challenged a deeply ingrained intuition that he existed in a singular, unified point within his body. But the more he reflected, the more liberating it felt. Consciousness is not confined to a point. It is a pattern of activity that emerges wherever the conditions for its processes exist. It can shift, adapt, and even split. His sense of self, once assumed to be fixed, was now seen as flexible and constructed, a dynamic consequence of the brain's ongoing computation. He connected these observations to other phenomena he had studied. In split-brain patients, severing the corpus callosum produces two independent centers of consciousness. The left hemisphere may act one way, the right another, each with its own intentions and knowledge. One person, two distinct experiential streams. The mind, in these cases, clearly isn't a singular, localized object. It is distributed, divisible, and emergent. Unity is a product of integration, not an inherent property. Feynman saw that this perspective reshaped our understanding of identity. If the mind is a pattern, if self-location is constructed, then personal identity is not a thing frozen in space and time. It is a continuous activity, a dance of neural firings, sensory integration, and environmental interaction. Damage the brain, and you alter the pattern, and with it, the self. The mind is inseparable from the processes that instantiate it. There is no separate soul that remains untouched, no inner observer standing apart from the machinery. For Feynman, the implications were profound yet grounding. Consciousness was mysterious, yes, but it was entirely natural. There was no need to invoke metaphysics or magic. The mind was not somewhere, because it is not a thing. It is what happens when a complex system, like the brain, models itself and its environment. That process can be studied, manipulated, and understood. And yet, even fully understood, it would remain astonishing.